Hi, this is Adam, and thanks for joining me at Wabi-sabi Podcast. For those that are returning subscribers, welcome back, and thanks for extending your patience with me as I'm kind of averaging around an episode a month at this point. I will be increasing that moving forward into 2020. But I just want to give my thanks to the existing subscribers. If you're new, welcome. The show is an exercise in embracing imperfection and impermanence, hence the name wabi-sabi, which is actually a Japanese aesthetic worldview on appreciating the imperfections, whether visually or I like to think of it in terms of life. And so that's what I do on this show. It is an uncut, unedited, and unscripted interview series, mostly with guests here, present in person in Los Angeles. Oftentimes also I speak with guests in different cities and different countries across the globe. And it is entirely listener supported. Thanks to my existing patrons via Patreon, where I have a number of support tiers starting as low as $1 a month. Every dollar, of course, just goes into the existing support structure of the show, because the show has to be hosted somewhere, and hosting costs money, as well as gear and any thought of expansion. So, thanks to my existing patrons. And if you're curious about supporting the show, you can check out patreon.com/wabi-sabi podcast. I'm really excited to introduce my guest this week, a very old friend, Yogi Hendlin, who is really a superhero, in my opinion. He is an environmental philosopher, political theorist, public health scientist, academic researcher, and assistant professor at Erasmus University in Rotterdam, which is in the Netherlands. As long as I've known Yogi, which is over 10 years now, many of those years he's lived outside of the States, which I think is a really interesting and exciting perspective from which to tell stories, especially being an American. He's also an accomplished musician and a partner and a father, like I am. And we spoke about a multitude of things, some of which are very nuanced. That being said, without further ado, here is Yogi Hendlin. But I feel like I have so many questions and inquiries and things I want to muse on with that only happens with like an old friend, especially an old friend that like I actually thought to myself, like I did a quick retrospective. I was like, wow, not only a lot has happened in the last 10, 11 years, but a lot has happened like in the last, I don't know, months, weeks, years. And to get a reflection, to get a sort of a mirror back, to reflect back on like what you've been experiencing. It's also interesting to experience friendship through, like having a friend that's you really experience online, because we live in faraway places, and so to have you here is a big treat. And there's so much to possibly get into, and I don't believe that anything can happen in one conversation.
Totally.
And I actually really I'm pressing, like at this point I'm pressing like every guest to like, okay, we have to make a part 2 where we definitely have to riff on these other things we didn't get to talk about. But to like have a goal or like a bullet list of like I want to talk about ABC is to me like I wouldn't say preposterous, but just I think it's too funny to try and do that.
And it's also sort of perpetuating the very thing that's like wearing us all out.
Exactly.
And I mean, I just bring it up because, you know, in the last month and a half, you know, we both have experienced the death of somebody very, very dear to us and who's been crucial on our path. I think probably in terms of cosmology and also obviously in terms of tea, you know, and Rio was conceived at Master Wang's tea temple in Oakland, and you know, in Master Wang's old room where he lived for 2 years. And so for us to hear news of his passing really shook our cosmology to the core in a way of just everything we believed in and our practices. And not that it shook us off of our path, but just again, I mean, Master Wang is the only person I've ever called master in my whole life, because I just don't, you know, my name's Yogi. Like, I don't do the guru thing. My parents like had a guru who named me Yogi. And I was just over it. It's like, I believe that everybody has their own, you know, spiritual path, and that, you know, the more that you're searching, the further you are generally from actually just living a good life in many ways, and that, you know, kindness is the sort of highest currency of a grounded, integrated spiritual life. And that's what I found with Master Wang and all of my encounters with him, and also seeing his Heyoka side, trickster side, you know, and loving that too, and just you know, it just reaffirmed that, you know, even those who you know, I thought in my world would live forever, right? I thought he would live to be an old wizened man, and not, you know, 53 or 54. You know, that it's all good in a way. Like, it really just was a huge exercise in letting go, and also, of course, in honoring these little moments that are so effervescent. Yeah.
I had heard through the grapevine, which is such a funny figure of speech, but I just heard, I think he just passed. And I have, the sum of my interactions with Master Wang, who, I met through our mutual friend Oshan, which that alone deserves another episode, an entire episode, which we can get into another time. Just at Om Shanti, I had met him at Om Shanti. I'd say maybe 2-3 experiences with him there, and that was it. And I had only experienced him like in this sort of, in a very peripheral sense, like through people, like through osmosis, that kind of thing. So I'm curious what transpired, and what that experience of, you know, the experience of, I guess, loss and grieving, like, what's that like for you?
Well, I think there are some aspects which, out of deference to his family, that I wouldn't share in a podcast.
Yeah.
But Oshan, who was a mutual who is a mutual friend of ours and who will be free once again in a matter of a few months. And bless that. He's been a huge community beacon, and up and down the entire West Coast, the Pu'er tea community has been indelibly influenced by Master Wang.
The Puerchics.
Yeah, the Puerchics. The Puerchics. Yeah. 25 years ago, Master Wang started bringing Pu'er to the West Coast, and up and down, like most of the tea masters on the West Coast today were students of his personally. David, for example, who is a very, very fine purveyor, has been with Master Wang to China many times. He made not only his whole business, but his whole life on the bedrock of Master Wang's teachings and of Yunnan province's finest teas. And his family lives that, and he lives that, and his place is one of the only places I know where you do not bring your cellular and electronic devices out. And that, it creates such a different energy. I'm writing a paper or a book chapter for a book that I'm editing. It's a fun part of being an academic. And at the end I talk about fasting. And I'm very interested in, like media fasts or other ways in which we abstain as not abstaining with no harshness.
Yeah.
Right? With feeling all the feels as the cravings or the compulsions come up, and getting some insight into all of our I don't want to just say unconscious behavior, but really like tooled. We are tooled to certain stimuli. And,
Sure.
Our environment is in many ways created to elicit certain like chain reactions in our biochemistry, so that somebody makes money down the line, and that's a very new phenomena in the last 100 years. And and having a space like Hidden Peak in Santa Cruz, where you can enjoy tea and conversation and board games and just admiring,
reading a book maybe.
Yeah, the other senses besides the sort of like dopamine triggers of likes and notifications and all of that which we've gotten. And by no means do I exclude myself from this category. I'm the worst sinner, to be sure. But once you have a kid, you're like, I don't care about any of this stuff really. Like my addictions may still be there, and nonetheless, like they have so much less power over me because I'm just so enticed by this creature that's calling, not only my need and assistance, but also my curiosity and my sensuality, and just pulling out these other parts of me that I didn't even know existed. And that sort of flow or resonance is so much stronger. And yet it's a daily like meditation.
Sure.
In real time.
Absolutely. Yeah. As a dad to a 4-year-old girl in the city of Los Angeles. Yeah, there's it doesn't surprise me that this gleaning on this subject happens in and out of every conversation. Doesn't matter who I'm talking to, what we may be dancing around, and whether it's with a choreographer or with a professor of journalism or with other academics. I had my friend Harold. I don't know if you heard that episode. He is a T brother who is pursuing a MFA at Davis, focusing on, I believe, architecture, and his thesis project is creating an ideal container for like immersive tea experiences. Again, as an antidote for whatever media addiction or like apathy or just rudeness. Like, I don't know what, I'm throwing those out there just because that is what
Sure.
would resonate with me. But media addiction is really, I feel like at this point, media addiction is a caricature of itself in the sort of like lexicon of, not just pop culture, but just like society right now, especially in this bubble of Los Angeles.
Or any, I would say, urbanized
Any
area.
urbanized, thank you. Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
any sort of like cosmopolitan West, they're called weird countries, like Western, educated, industrial, rich democracies. But less and less on the democratic
It's a good-
aspect.
it's a good
There's a really
acronym.
interesting paper about it because
Uh-huh.
they talk about 90 to 97% of all the neurobiology that's been done. I'm talking like hard science is done in the West on undergraduate students, so highly educated, right? Aged about 18 to 23. So our view of neurobiology as a sort of generalized or universal phenomenon is based on weird results, which is not shared generally in the world. In fact, it's an anomaly.
Yeah.
So our very understanding of how the brain and our nervous system works is based on a very small subset, even if it's, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Europe. It's still this teeny little subset of actual humanity and actual ways of being.
A fraction of humanity,
Yeah.
really. Yeah.
And in this teeny little slice of late capitalism,
Yeah.
right? Time slice. So we're taking like space, even though it's spatially distributed, you still have the same sort of epistemic cultures. People are being inculcated into the same sort of general ways of thinking
Yeah.
by hook or by crook, which means that, it could just be that they're all watching the same movies and the same shows, listening to the same music, have the same sort of background world, which is influencing them, even if they speak different languages. But I really wonder about how, we've been very successful at throughout the ages. If you look at the Opium Wars with England and China, China had everything. India had everything that England wanted. England had nothing to offer them. They had nothing.
So they just still,
So they just got them addicted to like a very, very debilitating substance and destroyed their population from the inside out. And basically all biological warfare, all chemical warfare, all propaganda has been based on that same model ever since then. This colonialism from within. You just give them something addictive and they'll kill themselves. They'll weaken themselves. You've probably heard of this sonic warfare where they have like these sound cannons, which you can't hear, but like make you sick and like make you woozy. To be used on domestic and foreign populations. And one of the interesting things about that is in debilitating a population, like with Lyme's disease or something like that, it makes it much, much easier to control that population. And so whether we're putting like these false models of neurobiology and then treating people as if they all conform to that model, or if we're talking about, this relationship of cultures and of notifications and of always being distracted, and what that's doing to especially young adult mental health.
It's like a form of, I'm just going to lob this out there, but it's like a form of like water torture where it's just kind of like beep. It's like you kind of get that drop is hitting your head at that like same time.
And we become so inured to it. I believe it's Ray Bradbury in his Martian Chronicles. He has one of these stories where he talks about anybody who was like above the average, they would put a little chip in their ear that every 20 seconds would beep. So if they were trying to have a complex thought, it would break it up. Anybody who was too physically powerful, they would put like some shackles or weights so that they couldn't fully move and have range of motion. And so as all of these, of course, in a definite Orwellian way, they would see these as affordances, but they were, purposefully handicapping anybody who might disrupt their order. And I feel that in many ways, I was just staying at my mom's house, because my son Rio is definitely needing of more extended family, just like a lot of us are realizing who have kids that the nuclear family model is completely sick, never worked, and doesn't work, so we need more community. And in the Netherlands we have no blood family, so we really want him to have as much, even though it might be hard for me at times, as much grandma and grandpa energy as possible, uncles and aunts and all of that, and in addition to the friends who play those roles, which in many ways I prefer because their values are more aligned to ours.
Sure.
But my mother had an Alexa in every room of her house, and we had to go around and unplug them all. And it just was astonishing to me that she was willing to, for the convenience of once a week, being able to say something at random and have it translate into a 15-minute timer. She was willing to be surveilled throughout her whole house.
Because everybody else has one.
Yeah.
My friend has one. Her friend has one.
But, it's really nice to come to, rebel oases, like rebel holdouts, strongholds, like here and, our home in Rotterdam, that, like, it really is a walk through a different dimension where it's so far away from what could possibly be taken as default or for granted.
Yeah.
And instead, your house is made for living, not for some sort of conception that itself is a result of a trauma.
Wow. Jeez. Every statement here is like, that's a whole nother podcast.
This tea's really good. What is it?
So this is one of my favorite, this is Shengpuer. It's one of my favorite teas that I have the sheer privilege of purchasing from my friend and tea sponsor of the show, White 2T.
White 2T.
White 2T.
White 2T.
Are a Western-facing tea company, all online, but they're based in, I believe, the Menghai area. So they're based in southwest China. And it's led by an expat named Paul, who I believe is from Wisconsin. And he's one of the few purveyors I know of, or at least have the privilege of knowing through something like Instagram and having like a rapport that way, who is just permanently based there as opposed to being based maybe in the States,
goes back for a couple months
and goes for on buying trips or sourcing trips. He's like there. This happens to here, smell the wet leaf. So this tea is called Often. And to me, it invokes this sort of like It is it's an aged, it's a considerably aged raw pu'er. So it was, I think, pressed in 2008. So it's got about a decade plus of age on it. So in the spectrum of raw pu'er, it's kind of like well on its way to maturity. You know, maturity would be like 15 or 18 years plus. I don't know what it is about this tea. And this is one of the few teas that he said he found, like it was like a warehouse find. He found a bunch of like mushroom cap shaped torchas, like cakes.
Yeah.
And probably got like several kilos of it. And it's just, you know, he's just probably aging, you know, continuing to age.
The wet leaf floral scent is incredible. Like from a show, you know, from any black tea, to have like that spectrum of floral notes is very, very rare.
And because he didn't produce this tea, it's just one of these rare. You keep learning about it as you drink it over time. This is the only tea that I've bought more than once, like probably for 2 years or more now. I've probably drank through close to a kilo of this tea. And every torch is like 250 grams, so it takes 4 of them to make a kilo. And it is the best. It's like the best fucking tea I've come across in this current shape, dimension, you know, like the atom right now who's at this age, living in this strange corner of the galaxy. Like, this tea makes so much sense, and it feels strangely like home. So I don't even know quite what that means. I'm just sort of like I'm lobbing these phrases out there, but without knowing a whole lot about this tea, it is something I love returning to, and I think it's very apt that he called this tea often. And, you know, not to make this like a 3-minute long infomercial for White 2 tea, but I mean, it's for an aged pu'er, it is, to me, worth its weight in gold. It's like under $30 for this cake.
Really?
It's incredible.
I'll get one.
Yeah.
What I mean, just because I don't drink much shang, I drink mostly sho.
Exactly.
And it's interesting smelling the wet leaf, which is just blows me away. I could just keep that to my nose for an hour.
I smell this wet leaf and I'm like, dude, this is vintage leather or like a vintage bookstore or something. It just really invokes this strange, like, not necessarily like bilocating to someplace else, but it just has this refined. I feel like we sound like cliches at this moment, but I don't care. It's a really fucking fantastic tea. And
then the cup itself, like it's more smoky, the taste.
Exactly.
And the smell from the cup has this like much more sort of almost chicory sort of smell to it, and then the taste does what I want any good pu'er to do, which is to cleanse my tongue, and then replenish all of my taste receptors with sort of like, it's like first you have the sorbet between the courses, and then you get like, the fluffy meal that's, the souffle or the entree, which in this case, is like, I would say like good Russian smoked salmon.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think smoked in like a Scotch sense, like that kind of like a spirit, mostly Scotch, because I can't really appreciate like gin or potatoes.
Yeah. But this, I mean, I say smoked salmon because of like sort of this, you know, like the sugar, like the brown sugar. Salmon. It has like that sort of essence, like it's brown sugar but savory.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of what I'm getting.
Which is really funny. Again, I'm not I'm not reading from a script, but he has a tea. He has a show pour, which I will definitely send you home with after this. Called Brown Sugar.
Okay.
It's a show pour,
Nice.
and for him, it's an homage to D'Angelo.
Sweet.
Yeah.
One of my favorite artists of the last 20 years.
Well, you're gonna fucking love that tea.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really amazing. And you know, for anyone who's listening or who will be listening to this at some point in the near or very far future, you know, let it be known that there are many people out in the world today and definitely in the past who can sit and muse over aromas and flavors of something as seemingly innocuous as Camellia sinensis, tea leaf, enjoyed the world over, second to water itself. I mean, this is what you know, what's birthed poetry, probably schools of art, and you know, and highly social experiences. The pub comes from the tea house. You know, the coffee shop comes from the tea house.
Yeah, that only arrived in Europe in the 1700s.
Exactly.
Coffee shop, but the tea house. I mean, imagine Vienna before the coffee shop.
Can't even imagine.
They had tea houses, right? And a lot of it was coming through Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Austro-Hungarian Empire, getting that all through the Silk Road. But D'Angelo, I mean, so have you been hip to Jacob Collier?
I have.
So D'Angelo is like one of his,
I bet.
you know, with broken rhythms, like just like the groove, like the contemporary, like crunk of R&B is one of his heroes and models for a lot of his beats. And he talks about that. And I got to see Jacob Collier live twice. Once in Paradiso,
Amsterdam.
You know Paradiso.
I've heard of it. I don't think.
So it's like, you know, the Doors played there, the Beatles played there.
Sure.
It's like it's all wood structure. It's like 3
Wow.
floors with balconies.
Whoa.
But like open, so you get like these 50-foot high, like beautiful resonance. And he's just like, I really think like Jacob Collier and his crew are like riding the crest of like what like music needs to be,
Sure.
in order to still like stay alive in our generation. You know, there's a lot of other good people too. Like, you know, I'm a Tiny Desk concert fan, so most of the people passing through that corner of the earth, I'm fond of. But yeah, it's just like in terms of the musicality and geeking out as a percussionist.
The geekery itself. I mean, he's so much. It's so interesting that it's so poignant that he exists in like the YouTube age, because forget about the fact that his music is so engaging sensorially from a musicato, rhythmic, and sonic sense. That speaks for itself, but it's also so visual and how he makes his videos, and when you see him just you know, do all these things, and that he's not a showman. He's like a beam of light, you know, just like all over the place. It lends itself to, you know, I'd say part of what if we're gonna be consuming media, thank God that guys like that exist, you know?
Totally.
Thank Goddess.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love about him, like his queerness. So queerness is like a concept I've been developing for a few years after I was living in Germany, in Berlin, and learning that in German the word queer is quer, which comes from the word diagonal. And what I have been seeking out, you know, like following the hummingbird, is in this Euclidean world of right angles,
Mm-hmm.
as Ani DeFranco calls it. You know, if these rules no longer apply to, you know, end of democracy, climate change, just all the things that are, you know, coming to a head, like, how are we going to get through the waste of the hourglass that we're currently in so that we can get back to that bulbous fecundity
Right.
again? And to me, this has to do through diagonal perspectives. We got to get away from the, you know, binaries, the oppositions, the, you know, yes, no, left, right, whatever the orientations, and just go deep through difference, where difference no longer becomes difference, it just becomes what is.
Right, it's no longer stark or contrasting, it just is.
Yeah, and no longer pegging people to anything if they are acting differently, right?
Right.
So the idea of identity itself as this fixed thing that is the same in time and space, when people, as we know, are very different in time and space. When I speak a different language, I'm a different person. And I don't mean that in a superficial way. I mean that my emotions, my sensibilities, my orientations, what I'm paying attention to in the world, my thought processes are completely different.
Sure.
So I get to be different. Thank Goddess.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's been one of the real big blessings of my life. Out of the last, like, 10 or 20 years, I've spent 10 of them outside of California.
Mm-hmm.
I know the world better than I know the U.S. because
Mm-hmm.
California is my home.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I've lived in Chile, I've lived in Brazil, I've lived in Spain and England and Austria and Germany and now the Netherlands. And I'm sure I'm forgetting something somewhere, but, you know, it's like the blessing to be able to have all that, you know, like Alan Watts talks about, the wisdom of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, being on the outside, being like, I don't know how to, like, walk down the street in this town. Like, how do people walk down the street?
Yeah.
I'm so curious, and I want to do it right, and I also want to do it my own way. And by having all the privilege of being who I am in all the ways, good, I would say, earned and unearned privileges, because I make a big distinction between the two. You know, most of the time when we talk about entitlement, we're talking about unearned privileges.
Mm.
But somebody who's worked really hard at something and, you know, done a ton of service work to their community, they've earned certain privileges that they, I think, should be identified with.
Mm.
It's not what I'm necessarily talking about with myself right now, but, you know, to just see that, like, I've had a lot of freedom to be my own queer self, and to not have to haul around, you know, all this baggage of my society that's been put on me of, like, oh, I have to show up like this or that,
Right.
or, you know, I have to perform the masculine or the feminine or the queer or the gay or whatever. And that's
Yeah.
why queerness is so cool, because queerness says, you know, away with all of that.
Mm.
I will be exactly as my muse is amusing me to be
Right.
in that moment. And of course, there's, like, a loss of agency that comes with that too, when we realize, oh crap, I'm not the master of all my actions and thoughts and emotion, but there's a whole lot flowing in and around me
Right.
that's coming through me. And when I don't have resistance to that, sometimes I want to cry.
Right.
Because I'm feeling so much, and I'm feeling like all the disparate, sometimes chaotic energies, you know, in a given place or time. But hey, I'm not holding on to that. I'm just letting it flow. So they're like tremendous liberation.
Yeah, geez, I mean, just right now, I have like 15 thoughts bottlenecking in my head about responding to that and musing on that, riffing on that too. Like, I think the further we go into this experiment of, you know, media oversaturation, and with that comes like the sort of incessant categorization, labelization, identifying everyone, everything, slapping a label on everything, quantifying for what?
Mm-hmm.
For what? For value? For faith or for belief or non-belief? I mean, that you can't just sit and just stare at this shape or this texture or yeah, I don't know. There's something about that this construct of labeling and categorization, which is great for, folders in a computer, and like an operating system, right, on a desktop. It's great to find things that way, but to walk through everyday life with that is, I think that's scary. It definitely alarms me, and I feel like, I guess I've never framed it in this way, but I'd say one of the ways in which I embrace my own queerness is in this particular act of preparing, serving, sharing tea. I find that tea itself is, I think, exalted feminine. Again, not to not to
Sure.
peg
Yeah.
gender to it or to peg it or to label it as such. I don't want to speak in absolutes. But I think that, tea and the act of being with tea and serving tea is a feminine act. At least for me, let me just speak subjectively. It invokes, sensuality and femininity that feeds what I understand to be my masculinity. And
Or yin yang.
exactly.
Same. You always have the drop in
Mm-hmm.
each. Yeah, I mean, one could imagine a tea ceremony that's like technically perfect and without any substance, and being left so thirsty.
Yeah.
And on the other side, and this is where I think queerness actually has this sort of, in a Hegelian sense, this transformative Aufhebung, this supersession of these opposites, right? The like avatar version of the Tao. If you're all heart and you make a really crappy cup of tea because you don't have a certain sufficient technical ability because you haven't trained your senses in a methodical way, then it's also like for naught.
Right.
And that's where I see, the Jacob Colliers of the world, the Master Wangs, the Oshans, the people who are not operating according to the analytic romantic or the enlightenment romantic spectrums. There's a great book by Ian McGilchrist, which looks at the brain. He's a psychiatrist, and it's called The Master and His Emissary.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, he talks about, the left and right hemispheres of the brain, which in some senses has been discredited, and in some senses is a very useful heuristic or shorthand for actually what goes on.
Sure.
And more, like over the years, the feeling that I've gotten is that when we have the ability to have novelty, to learn in a way that transforms everything that we've ever learned before, to alter, renew, wash away, and rebirth new categorizations, then we're operating in a sort of natural intelligence. When we're a tree, if a seedling is put in a different environment than its mother tree was, it will check out, okay, we're a little bit low on these nutrients, so let's do this thing. And so it infinitely adaptable. And so we talk about adaptogens a lot, in the current world, and adapting to climate change. And I believe in the next few hundred years we're going to see more like new species popping up, both because of like weird chemicals and nuclear waste, but also climate change and then the displacement. There's been so much displacement that all beings on this planet, including our bacteria, are going to learn new skills in order to cope, and our coping mechanisms are going to become very different from that of our ancestors. Like, look at the 1950s. You had what you had various forms of amphetamine for housewives, and you had alcohol for the workaday man.
Right.
Right. Those were coping mechanisms to try to adapt to a you could say hostile environment. They didn't really work that well because they were what Master Wong would say short wave. So I really feel that because, especially for the new generations, that we are developing and honing worldwide in a sort of fractal puzzle sort of way, new modes of being, which are not convergent necessarily, but mutually reinforcing, which will, in Buckminster Fuller's sort of way of seeing things, simply be more useful, cooler, more sexy, and better at adapting to the new circumstances than the old ways of being. And I'm talking about, everything from new political structures that are heterarchies rather than hierarchies.
Mm-hmm.
You could say democracy 2.0, where you have direct, what's it called, blockchain voting, like they have in Estonia.
I was wondering if there are populations that do it.
They still have representatives. They haven't gotten rid of that needless bureaucratic class yet.
Yeah.
But all voting is done on their smartphone.
Fucking brilliant.
If you combine that with, and I think it's mandatory too, like in Australia, which it should be.
They do take, it's a day off. It's not a work day.
Exactly. There you go. Super simple, easy.
Mm-hmm.
And then what if you had an engaged and informed populace where you could allocate your vote, like for all matters on tea, I have Adam vote for me because I don't have the time to check into that. But on all things tea, maybe there's millions of people who allocate their tea vote to you. And so like you are the tea guru, and so you're the expert, right? So you have a really interesting, when I teach my students at the university, they tend to forget that expertise actually exists and that opinions are just as good as anything else.
Right.
Which is sort of a byproduct of, the whole postmodern philosophy that was taken up by corporations in the 80s, 90s, and aughts.
That's right. The customer's always right sort of thing.
Yeah, but more than that. It's like our glyphosate's toxic, but everything's toxic.
Right.
The tobacco industry said, applesauce will kill you if you eat enough of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this sort of the false.
It's almost like a Twinkie defense,
exactly.
But in like a whole.
Yeah, it's like the false equivalence of things that are different.
Yeah.
And part of my work is I don't believe in equality. Nothing that actually exists outside of abstraction. Like spreadsheets, you can say 2 + 2 = 4, but show me 2 of any single thing, whether it's an atom, a molecule, or an electron, that are actually the same. Sameness doesn't occur in life, in the world. And so when you get rid of that concept of sameness, you get rid of the idea of equality, and then you get into equity, right? What does it mean to be equitable to somebody else who is also deserving of respect, which I'm a adherent of the idea of, the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Declaration on Human Rights, but it needs to be based on valuing difference rather than sameness, rather than, because you're a human, we'll grant this to you. No, all life needs that. Humans have been, the category of human itself is highly problematic, right? Because what is a human apart from our ecology, apart from our culture, right? Like we're nothing. We are born and bred from the soil, from our culture, from the trees, from the air, from the molecules that we inhale every moment, from the bacteria floating through this air, from whatever's in our water, and to take that away from us or to poison it is taking us away from ourselves and poisoning ourselves, and thus the separation. So my Twitter sort of like...
Is this what you lecture on?
Yeah, in part. But I do it in like easier...
And where is this?
At Erasmus University, Rotterdam.
So in Rotterdam.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
do you lecture in English?
I lecture in English. It's a funny thing. So when I was getting my PhD in Germany, I lectured in German because I speak German. But my Dutch passively is much better than my active. So, I don't yet speak.
I hear it's a
active
difficult
English.
language to really grasp.
I mean, speaking German, I can understand most of it written. But yeah, it's just like with whatever capacity to learn future languages, I think I want to do like Russian or ancient Greek or Sanskrit or something like that. You know.
So a lot of Slavic, but also. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, but of course my son's learning it. But yeah, you know, my Twitter like motto is interspecies solidarity. Because once we understand, you know, that was like in Europe you have solidarity, like in France, you know, was it fraternité, égalité, forget the third one, but solidarity, fraternité, égalité, liberté.
Right.
So the fraternity part, right, is solidarity. And in the U.S., we never got that really, because we were like, you know, Puritans and all this weird stuff, and homesteaders, pioneers, you know, radical, rugged individualism. And we never got the solidarity bit, at least like instantiated in our culture and our values.
Maybe only religiously, but not.
Sure,
Yeah,
but I mean, look how far that's gotten.
Yeah, it only goes to your crew.
To your tribe.
To your tribe, exactly.
Yeah. And so, yeah, just to finish the thought, it's like one of these things that once we understand with solidarity, like that it really, you know, like there's a Santa Cruz brand of clothing called No Enemy, right? The Enlightenment tradition picks up on, in the West, picks up on Buddhism and talks about like, okay, it's not this Christian good and evil thing, right? Where you have like a wrathful God or whatever, but instead it's, you know, enlightenment and ignorance. And so it's the idea that those who are being ignorant themselves are being parasitized in a sense. And so that's where like, it's not a pity and compassion, but it's like, it's our job to help move you from ignorance to freedom. And what that looks like, what that path looks like, what enlightenment looks like, is going to be different for each individual. But if there's no individuals, then enlightenment is like a collective process. And so you get back to all these paradoxes, right? So when I talk about queerness, I'm talking about paradoxes where you can never pin it down, like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You can either give a location or a time, but not both at the same time.
Right.
So like this takes you into Alfred North Whitehead's process philosophy, Deleuze and Guattari, like all this like esoteric 20th century process philosophy. But as a musician, we know this all the time, because whatever is being recorded here, even with our voice in this conversation, even the infinite forms of capture that could possibly be developed are still never going to grasp the thing itself, the event, the hummingbird, which is ungraspable. So in a sense, the more video cameras we place up, the like less room for magic we're creating in our society, because as Heraclitus said, nature loves to hide.
Sure.
So that's why I enjoy being in places like here in your living room, compadre, where we get to have some spaciousness, and you know, I don't feel surveilled. Instead, I'm offering myself to this recording device with you in a, as the Dutch say, a gezellig, a community, sort of warm, like hygge in the Nordic countries, you know, this sort of comfort and feeling safe and trusted, which for me has been like a lifelong issue of like, how do I be myself? I try to find areas where I'm safe and where I can trust the people, but also the space. I got into professor mode for
No, that's phenomenal because I you know, I didn't want to feel like I was inquiring in such a black and white kind of a question. It's like, oh, you know, like what's your name and what do you do and but I love grasping on what you just mused on, because it really is it is from this place of maybe not equanimity, because I should get to know the term better, but from this place of generosity and curiosity and openness and receptivity with which I establish this container of podcast. Because sure, it's pretty cliche for any other cisgendered white male to like walk around Los Angeles going like, yeah, you should listen to my podcast. But it's I'm not using it as a soapbox or as a place to like deliver a sermon or some, it's like it is a curious space. It is a space with which to like share stories or riddles or musings or it's hopefully only a place to learn and to grow from, which when I go into deeper layers, this experience, this conversation, even though we're recording this conversation for public consumption at some point, but
or edification,
but it is an homage to what we experienced at Om Shanti.
Yeah.
Like it's always sort of like I could always trace it back to that.
Totally. And those concerts, we played some of the first concerts at Om Shanti. No, the first ones, and that's why when you're like, oh yeah, we could do it over the phone, or I was like, no man, I want to have tea with you.
Yeah,
I want to have tea with you.
No, and what an honor, like all the way from from Holland, you're sitting here right now.
When hearing your other episodes as well, just hearing the sound of the tea and like the pouring of the water and the gustatory experience is a big part for me of being transported.
It's a
audio.
It's a side dish of ASMR in the podcast.
Yeah, and like the elements here, like the 5 elements of the tea. And I think the instruments you play and our music that we've made together like also had like these sort of 5 elements. And so when I think of tea culture in its non-commodified form, and by that I don't mean any sense of purity, right? Because that's also going back into these old binaries. Instead, like the diagonal is wonderful that your podcast is sponsored by White 2 Tea, right? Wonderful. Like may abundance come to all who drink these teas, and may we not have to like have like this image of the artist who's starving, or the volunteer who's like the Jimmy Carter, like he's like 93 and like bandaged all over and he's still making homes for Habitat and Humanity. Like maybe he can take a little bit of rest, and like like the idea that because we've had such a dominance of like this aggressive self-promotion and I'm a self-made man, all of these like toxic masculinity models that especially have been strong in the US, and then unfortunately have had contagion with a lot of the rest of the world. That part of, I think, the healing of a lot of the artists, the thinkers, the reflective members of society, which I know will have to grow to adapt to what's going on.
Sure.
Improvisation and reflection, thinking for oneself, are evolutionary traits that are going to allow us to thrive. And so may we find good community ways, right, in this sort of mycorrhizal sort of way to spread the love. This tea, and with my son, like we pour tea with him on a regular basis, and he loves to pour tea, makes a big mess. But, it's so beautiful to see just in the process itself, it automatically brings you somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. But it's also a very human act.
Totally mundane.
Totally.
And that's, some of the elements that, I really appreciate about, for example, in Holland, just cycling around everywhere, where everybody, age 3 to 93 is cycling around. And it's a no-brainer. Like, it's not anything extraordinary because it's so safe.
It's not made into a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not made into a thing. And so you have, like, all of this, like, good that's coming out of it as, like, a result. But that's not, like, nobody does it for exercise only, per se. Like,
sure.
The commuters. Like, I have an 18-minute commute along a lake on my way to work.
Sounds terrible.
But I mean, when I was living in San Francisco, or living in Oakland, working in San Francisco, I took my fold-up bike
onto BART.
Got on the BART, got on the Muni, and that would take me on a good day an hour, on a bad day 2.
Mm-hmm.
When there was something broken down.
Mm-hmm.
And most of it, like, was in a steel box with a bunch of people who were not happy to be going to work, and the difference between that and being able to sing or just brood and express whatever is coming along with the birds, with the trees, with the sun or the snow and the lake on my way to work clears me. So when I sit down at my desk, I don't need, like, another hour just to arrive.
Sure.
But rather I can already, like, get going. I've already kickstarted my entire day.
Fuck. I mean, therein lies the paradox of living where I'm currently living, or living where you lived in Oakland, and people in the Bay Area who have come to, have chosen to come to live there, but based on this old infrastructure model, right, of, like, Wild West, things will be far apart, and we're either going to, right, car-centric, yeah. Right, and which in turn makes people, or encourages this kind of, like, craving of really, like, Gollum, like, reaching for a device. Like, I just gonna, if I can't sit in a car and be in my bubble, I'm gonna just sit in my own personal 2x2 bubble on the BART, yeah, or on the Muni,
yeah,
in my device with those
pods.
God,
non-recyclable, like, quick dying, very expensive.
The AirPods.
Yeah.
That alone, it's like, I don't even want to dirty this episode right now, but it's like, I feel like so much of what is wrong with people today, and it's like, I don't want to pass all these judgments, but it's like the AirPod itself as a symbol, as a status symbol, the fact that people crave it because it makes them feel connected to other people.
Yeah.
Because I have this thing too. But it's like you're I don't know.
I think people should just get face tattoos, and then we'll know what tribe they belong to. Because, that's the thing that brands try to do.
Yeah.
Like that. They're basically face tattoos, like Nike, Apple, or whatever, where I remember when I moved to LA, and I had, like, the only time I've ever had a Apple phone.
Yeah.
I had a iPod 3G.
Uh-huh.
And it was, like, the new cool thing.
Uh-huh.
And, like, I felt connected to other people at these same stupid machines that I
Yeah.
did. It's like, wait. Back up a second. We're connecting because you have the same brand of widget that I do, not because, you actually care about the same things I do, or you love participating in the same activities or anything like that. Wow. That for me is incredible.
It's really gotten down to that level, which is why I'm continually, if I can get into a groove of doing this, like, weekly, would be fantastic. even if it's monthly, that's still very meaningful to me. I've gotten to the point right now through a medium like Patreon, where I have the show sponsored by 4 patrons, which is enough to literally pay for hosting, because I host the show on SoundCloud.
Yeah.
Without building a website, a standalone website just for the show. So it is at least right now, with the help of these 4 phenomenal individuals, the show stands and is chugging along, and the act of pouring tea, not just for myself, but for people, for the public, is something that I still like am very much impassioned with these days, because if we need a fucking reason to get together and commiserate on things, or just to be quiet together, like, dude, let's do it over tea. I mean, what better medium to do that? And I'm actually really excited because today's Monday and you're here, and starting on Wednesday, I'm going to be doing a 2-week series of afternoon, like Kung Fu tastings. It's like a tasting
awesome.
series.
Here?
Here in the Arts District, in this beautiful shop
Cool.
called The Good Liver.
Nice. That's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And they have this upcycled tasting bar in the back of their shop where they host these tea flights.
Sweet.
I imagine your schedule is...
We'll be in the Bay.
You'll already be back up north.
Yeah.
Cool. But
I would love to. I mean, man. I mean,
and
so,
like when we get to,
yeah.
because we will get to Europe, we will get across the pond, and we're actually, so this is another whole nother, like, if I had another hour to talk to you right now, I want to talk to you about, like, what is the experience of raising a family, experiencing family, like, somewhere else, not in America, not in the bubble of LA, but in a progressive society.
Nominally.
Nominally, thank you. Nominally progressive society. I mean, a society that is old, right?
Yeah. That's
Holland
for sure.
is hundreds of years older, or if not thousands of years older than the planet LA. But
like you were saying earlier about infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, Rotterdam was bombed during the war, so it's very different from other, because it was the port, other Dutch cities, wider roads and all that. But still, you have a lot of the Dutch virtues that come through, for better and worse too. I don't want to idealize it. Like, we had so many imaginaries of
Sure.
what Holland was like before we moved there. But, yeah, I mean, just briefly, like this question of like infrastructural violence, right?
Architorture. Infratorture, yeah.
So much revolves around design, and that's like one of the challenges of our current conundrum. How do we how do we compost dysfunctional design to use as much of the existing infrastructure, but transforming it into something completely different? Because I'm so sick of oh yeah, this doesn't work, so let's raise it to the ground, build something new. 5 years later, this isn't quite perfect. I mean, how unsustainable is that? Not just like, ecologically, but
Waste.
culturally.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, but I got used to this nook over here. I want to keep my nook. And this whole group of people wants to keep their nooks.
Yeah.
So how do we keep those nooks while, in 5 years' time, people will not be owning cars nearly as much as they do now.
Yeah.
Shit's gonna be automated. Your Uber is gonna be your transportation. It can be a lot cheaper.
It maybe even be a public utility by that point.
It should be.
Yeah.
Just feed it into universal basic income.
Yeah.
Have like a certain cap to encourage better forms
Smarter.
of public transportation as well. Mass transit that's not cringeworthy. Like really great integrated system, and then have clean air, so people want to cycle more, want to walk around more. I love those little scooters, as annoying as they are on the sidewalks. Like they're
They're
great.
convenient.
They're convenient, and like how many parking spots are saved? Like how many tons of CO2 and other volatile organic compounds.
Is it a thing over there too?
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, it's great.
Because here it's really infiltrated
Everywhere.
quickly.
San Diego, LA, New York, San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, I
Obviously,
think
there's always a better way to do it. But
yeah, but I think it's changing the way that we relate to ownership and society, and eventually, all we really want is the service.
yeah,
We don't want to have to like pay the upkeep and all that. And if I owned a car, I'd be miserable, like having to worry about parking tickets and all this. But I'm sorry. I know we're in LA.
no,
It's
totally.
probably a
And I'm actually,
Bulletin subject.
without knock on wood, without really jinxing my Jedi powers right now, I've been fighting. I don't have many tickets, but I've been fighting every ticket, and I've been somehow the person on the other side of that query
has been feeling the
has been
force.
feeling my Jedi
Your love,
force.
you're like, I'm wishing you such a beautiful day.
Totally.
You can just,
and
like,
I'm not
let this
being
go.
vile about it.
Yeah,
I'm just
of
being
course.
like, this is
Yeah.
really unacceptable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's been working.
Good for you. I think reverence and professionalism and respecting yourself and your own self-sovereignty.
Kindness.
Yeah.
Again, just coming back to kindness,
Totally.
which I'm, again, without really knowing the term equanimity, it sounds like, I feel like kindness is somewhere in there.
Yeah, kindness is being kind to everything in that moment. So equanimity, so in Vipassana, which for me is like one of the legs of the tripod of my cosmology, which enables me to like get around and get by and to enjoy, the liminal crispness of each moment. Vipassana has like awareness and equanimity as like the two wheels of the cart.
Cool.
So if you don't have awareness and just equanimity, you're going to go in circles.
Got it.
If you just have awareness and no equanimity, you go in circles. But
Right.
equanimity is like, that part of awareness that realizes the tension, having kindness for that, and having kindness for the tension. So
Right.
there's no pushing away of anything. So ultimately, equanimity means no craving or aversion, which means being Tao with all that is.
Right.
And just like accepting and feeling like all of our resistance and suffering with whatever is, and then letting it diminish little by little, not because we're doing anything, but just because in the care that comes with the attention is the care, which is the equanimity. In caring for every last little bit of possible perception, anything that could possibly exist, like in that moment of your existence, and not shoving away or trying to bring towards yourself at the exclusion of, but just rather like observing with infinite care. Everything sort of sorts itself out.
Thanks for listening to the conversation. If you want to check out more about Yogi, you can follow him on Twitter at Liminal Messages, LIMINALMESSAGES. And you can also explore the articles he's got published, as well as his research and a really engaging blog at yogihendlin.com. That's YOGIHENDLIN.com. Again, thank you to the subscribers as well as the new listeners. If you're curious to learn more about how this show works and exploring ways to support it, you can check out patreon.com/wabi-sabi podcast, where listeners can support the show for as little as $1 a month. And if you choose to support it at $5 a month, I will personally be sending you artwork every year. So check that out, and looking forward to more episodes and navigating into the holiday season. Thanks for listening.